you, Stefan, for the introduction. Some of you guys might know me. I think we've done a few programs in the past for FNPS, but over the past couple of years, it's been a pretty fun culinary journey for me and Hillary, who sadly could not be here. She started her yearly vacation, so she's going to be off canning her jellies and harvesting her foods and doing whatnot. But I wanted to give everyone a little show of kind of what we've compiled over the years in our native edible escapades. Typically, the way we would do our programs is in person. Of course, we can't really do that. The current state of things. And what we would do is we would usually have some kind of snack or some kind of, or actually add like a live cooking element to it. So I really tried to double down on the kinds of plants I can talk about, and also some really good like recipe ideas and how to use these plants. From humble beginnings, way back when, I don't know if anyone remembers Wilcox's Spring Eco Fest. That was back in April 2018. Me and Hillary set up a little tiny table in the way back of the nursery. We did a little program talking about some of the native edibles that we were carrying at the time. And we made a couple of samples, let everyone try them. And that kind of like sparked the interest in us to really like buckle down, see what we could use, and kind of push it to the limit. So that little success got us invited to the Fans Native Plant Show. We spoke in front of a bigger crowd, much more nerve-wracking. And I'm pretty sure that was the first time that I'd introduced that crowd of people to bird peppers and how spicy they really are. And I think, everyone's mouth on fire. But it was a great experience for us. And that success spawned the first iteration of our Cooking with Native Plants program, where if you can see the picture, I kind of set up a mock kitchen, had all of my equipment, and did a cook through of some, I believe it was like chicken tacos or something like that. Showcasing the plants. I had Hillary by my side. She would talk through all the different uses, how to grow the plants, when to harvest, all that stuff, while I went through and did the actual cooking. We then did it in front of a much larger crowd, much more nerve-wracking crowd in front of the Pinellas Extension service, which was really cool. We got to do a little it was early in the morning, so we did a little breakfast menu of some scrambled eggs, elderflower pancakes, and some other cool stuff. There's definitely been no shortage of ways for us to express ourselves with the native plants. It's definitely been something we've kind of developed a passion for. So the whole kind of idea is, it all ties back into the main idea of why you would plant natives in your yard. You want to support ecosystems, you want to support sustainability, and you want to, be able to provide for wildlife. But, we kind of are definitely good on that message, and we want to kind of push the envelope a little bit and see what more they can do. The other benefit really is that these are not widely cultivated or at all cultivated plants as far as their culinary uses. So they're, new flavors that you might not be familiar with. When you're going around and testing these new things, it kind of opens up a world of new applications, because it's not the basil you're used to, it's not the different herbs you're used to, or even vegetables. So it kind of gave us a lot more room to play with when we would try to create these dishes. And everyone knows that, generally a lot of these plants in a landscape setting, or even in, some container gardenings, they're going to be a little bit easier to care for than different herbs or vegetables. You may not have to deal with pests as much, because you've got a native yard, you've got beneficial insects, things that are going to take care of those problems for you. And that kind of the same idea is that you can put these plants in a pot. Like myself, I live in an apartment. I've got a little tiny patio, so I'm growing what I can, but even then I can still grow stuff, and still have stuff to pull from when I need. But also, it's a great opportunity to get another benefit out of the plants that are in your yard that you're already landscaping with. You're getting them for other uses. It's just something that, you got to point people towards and say, hey, look, you know, this plant is great, but, you know, did you ever think about pulling a cocoa plum off and eating it, or making a cake out of it, or, you know, things like that. So what I want to do first is kind of go through my list of favorites. These are the ones that we've had the most success with, and things that are also pretty relevant during this time of the year. And then towards the end, I'll go through some of the recipes that we've successfully created, and kind of give you an idea as to how you can incorporate these plants and these flavors, you know, into your next dish. So everyone knows this plant, the beautyberry, Calicarpa americana. It's a great plant. It's a great wildlife plant to provide for pollinators. You know, it's got that nice bright purple berry in the summer, and it's also got that, you know, nice fragrant leaf. Use it for, you know, insect repellent, you know, whatever. Some people really like the smell, kind of like a perfume. But this one's great. The berries, especially when you cook them down, you know, they're small but mighty. So when you throw them in a big pot, cover them with water, boil them out, and then you can start adding like sugars and pectin, make jams or jellies. It's got a very like floral flavor. And when you can add, of course, a whole bunch of sugar, it can really bring out that nice floral note. And it, you know, Hillary always says whenever she cooks it, it just perfumes up her home. It's got this wonderful fragrance. And, you know, it's not a flavor that you see on the shelves at the supermarket. It's something that you can, you know, feel very special about, that you're making it your own, and that it's a very exclusive kind of flavor. And I've got examples of what we've used, I think, all of these plants for in here. So, you know, that's a pretty common one. I think we all know about that. The next one that I've got is a wild basil. That's Ocimum campechianum. It's a South Florida species. We've seemed to do pretty well with growing it up here. Not too many problems keeping it alive. It's just that we tend to sell out of the plant before we can really understand that, you know, that was our last one. So then we got to scour around the nursery, try and find seedlings. We have a hard time keeping track of mother plants, and so that we can keep production up. But this is a plant that certainly has different sort of basil flavor to it. It's a lot less earthy. It's kind of more along the lines of a straight mint. But it does have kind of those like basil-y overtones. It's more in line with like a Thai basil, with just a little bit more mint in it. But it's got a really nice flavor, really good to use for like savory dishes, like Asian cooking. It's really, I found some pretty good use in that realm. And it's a fairly easy plant. It only grows to about like 2 to 3 feet tall, like sun, and once it's established, it's pretty drought tolerant. So that's one of our favorites to use for, you know, as an herbaceous plant. So in spreads, like fresh herb spreads, or used for flavorings of teas and stuff like that. That's kind of what we've done with that. Another one that you're probably familiar with, dotted horsemint, is another great plant. It's an absolute monster when it comes to pollinator plants. This thing is fantastic. It's got a beautifully intricate flower, and, you know, as this thing grows, it can develop into a pretty sizable plant, like 3 feet by 3 feet. It is an annual, so you may have to you know, just wait for it to pop back up from seed in the spring. But this is a plant that's very similar in like composition to an oregano. It's got a lot of thymol in it. It's kind of got that kind of mintiness too. Now this is one of those plants that's extremely potent. So if you were to go out and use this, if your recipe calls for like a tablespoon of oregano, and make sure it's fresh oregano, not dried oregano, because dried ones have kind of lost a little bit of lost a little bit of their intensity. This is something you would want to cut like in half. You know, only use half of the required amount if you're substituting for the horse mint. But this stuff makes great like herbal teas along with the basil. Really, really good, easy to grow plant for that. Bird pepper is another one I mentioned at the fan show. I kind of singed everyone's tongues a little bit because at that moment I really didn't understand just how hot these things were. So you kind of have to like temper your expectations when you're putting it into a dish. I would call it a little bit hotter than like jalapenos. So, and the fact is that they're smaller peppers. So if you're processing them or you're cutting them, up or something like that, chances are you're chopping up seeds and you're getting all the spice that this thing has to offer. Which, if you're using it as that kind of a vessel, you're using it as a way to get a little bit of pepper flavor, but some heat into your dish, then this thing is great for that. This is also a plant that is considered an annual, so save some seeds for the next year. This thing produces, like the picture shows, a whole lot of peppers. Grows to about 3 to 4 feet tall, and this is something that everyone uses peppers in everything. You can throw it in salsas. You can do chimichurris, which is great. It's kind of like an olive oil based like a pepper marinade or sauce, and I've done that before to great success. The first time I took this stuff home and I tried out cooking with it, I had blended up some of the herbs, peppers, and some olive oil in a blender, and you would marinate like a steak in it, and then just throw that on like cast iron or stainless steel, cook it through, and then if you had any like residual sauce that you had left aside, you could top it with that. But I didn't realize how hot they would be and just how exposed all that capsaicin inside of it would be. So the first time I threw it on a hot cast iron, it basically just like bombed my apartment, and the smoke detectors went off. We were all like breathing in straight like aerosolized capsaicin, and it was just a headache. And my roommate came out and he was so confused. And so anyways, I guess the lesson is that they're hot, they're delicious, but make sure you're using the proper amounts. And the thing is, with all of the stuff that I've done, I got kind of lazy. I don't have recipes for a lot of these things. My approach to cooking as like an amateur cook is that once you kind of understand flavor profiles and you kind of understand, basic like seasoning techniques and stuff like that, I don't really use like standard recipes. So a lot of this stuff I kind of do by feel. Once I've got a taste for how hot these things are or what kind of a flavor the wild basil has or something like that, it just kind of makes its way into the dish. So I've gotten a lot of requests from people that ask like, oh, do you have recipes? Can you give me a recipe for this stuff? And I'm like, well, I don't really, because I just kind of cooked with it. But so anyway, so it's kind of like an as you feel it out, as you kind of experience it, you're able to understand it and use these plants. So the next one is meadow garlic. This is Allium canadensa, and this one is a little tiny annual garlic, or onion, I should say. It's called meadow garlic, but it's really just an onion. And so you can use the greens just like you would chives. Cut them off, pinch them off, chop them up, throw them into like an omelet, or to give you that fresh oniony flavor. Or once they start going dormant, once the leaves start dying back, you can harvest the bulbs, and they're little tiny pearl onions. They're about the size of a quarter. You can get plenty of them. They definitely produce quite a bit if you've got a number of plants. They're great for pickling. You can chop them up and use them as is. Hillary, I'm sure, will be doing a whole lot of that during her vacation. She's got all of these plants in her raised beds, and this is about the time of year that she's doing that. So I don't have any pictures of these things being pickled or processed or anything like that, but once we get further into it, we can kind of go over how to process these things as well. And these being an annual and an onion or a garlic, once the flowers are done and the heads have started to set, that's going to be your set for the next year. So you'd save that, plant it out, and then regrow your onions from that. So the next plant we kind of came across, and this was kind of a fun story, is creeping cucumber, Malothria pendula. It is a widespread annual, pretty much all over the state, I think in every single county. And this one we came across, it's not widely cultivated or available from any wholesale growers. My mom a few years ago had asked me to come by the house and do some maintenance around the place. And she said, Davis, there's a vine that's growing on the AC unit. Can you just get that off? And that was the one time I had ever been by to do any sort of landscaping at my parents' house. And I pulled it off, kind of noticed as I crushed it up that it smelled like cucumber. So I took a sample, took a couple pictures, brought it in into the store, and ID'd it. And turns out that it's a member of the cucumber family, a Malothria. So we grew it out. And found out that, yeah, they do produce little tiny green cucumbers. They're about the size of your pinky nail. And these vines are incredibly prolific. They can grow 6-8 feet on a trellis. And later on in the summer, they'll produce a whole bunch of these little tiny cucumbers, and they're great to eat out of hand if you want. We saved enough to make a few jars of little tiny, like, bite-sized pickles, which were fantastic. So this is a really cool kind of plant that we discovered, and a great one to add to little salads, little tiny cucumbers, or like I said, the pickling is great. And I've got a great use for this that I came up with a little bit later in the program. So elderberry, I'm sure, is something that everyone's familiar with as well. It's pretty versatile in its uses culinarily. I'm sure people know of elderflower this or that, liqueur or like lemonade they sell too. And also the berries that come after are have really good like antioxidants and like medicinal qualities. So those are pretty widely used. But we've done some experiments with this because we've got a pretty sizable shrub on the property. This is something that definitely, if you've got in your landscape, you've got moisture and you've got a lot of space, because it does get big and it likes to drink. So, it's something that we've experimented with as well. And you do have to be careful, because I think pretty much everything except for the flowers and the fruit are toxic. So you want to make sure that you're processing it very carefully. I do have pictures of Hillary, kind of cutting all the heads off with scissors, and picking them off and doing that sort of thing. But the flowers are wonderfully fragrant. When you steep them in with like a simple syrup solution over a day or two, they make great syrups, really floral, very, very wonderful syrups. And also the berries have a wonderful kind of like earthy tang to them that makes great, syrups, jellies, or what have you.
Davis, can you actually make a tea with the berries?
On the elderberry?
Yeah, there was a question actually. I mean, I've tried it before, but from your experience, have you actually made tea not with the flowers, but like the actual berries?
I haven't. I imagine it's probably, it's probably fairly good. I think once you boil any of these sort of berry type harvests down, you'll kind of break it down. You'll let all that good stuff from inside the berry kind of seep into the water, and yeah, it probably makes a pretty nice tea.
Okay, so but pretty much someone was saying you're not just eating the flowers. The leaves, I don't know about any kind of medicinal use of the leaves or any culinary use of the actual leaves.
No, and I'm pretty sure those are toxic. So I would, anything, the stems, the leaves, parts of the bark, roots, any of that stuff, anything but the flower or berry, stay away from, because they can contain those toxins.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the next one, I think, was a donation by that man that has just spoken, Stefan Babyak. Actually, I think it was Mallory that donated these, but this is Florida Betony, Stachys floridana. It is a very, very aggressive wildflower. Only grows to about a foot or two tall, has these cute little like pinkish white flowers on it. And these things, as the genus might give away, is that these things have a starchy tuber. So they kind of look like maggots. They're kind of gross. Hillary always joked about freaking out her daughter or her daughter's kids by putting these in like a Halloween salad, her maggots with her eye of newt, Malothrias, and all of these other like orange and purple carrots and stuff like that. So these plants grow all over the place. They grow incredibly aggressively. So, you do have to watch out if you're going to grow this plant. Um, and the way that you harvest it is once the heat really kicks up, these things kind of go dormant, and they're going to start reserving the energy in the tubers for when cooler weather comes. They're gonna sprout back out. So that's when you're going to want to harvest these things, when all that energy has gone back into the root. And these things are kind of they're kind of similar to like water chestnuts. They've got that wonderful like watery crunch, a little bit of like radish flavor, so they're great for pickling. I actually use these as a partial base for some veggie burgers that I made a few years ago for another garden club, kind of as like a binding agent. And it worked really well. You could also shred these into like a fine shred, and I've thought of doing like potato pancakes or something like that with them, because they've kind of got that sort of thing going on. They're also just great to eat out of hand. They taste really fresh, really clean. They just look a little funky, so it's kind of fun to freak people out with them. And to my point, Hillary, when we were first kind of introducing this and growing in with this plant, this bed used to have, I'm pretty sure, one section in the back right corner that had physalis, our ground cherry. We were also experimenting with that, the tomatillo, and a few other things in the bed, but otherwise it was completely clear. And she planted a little bit of betony in it, and it just ate the bed. So you do want to be careful if you've got this, that you kind of confine it to a pot and that you're able to harvest it and keep it under control. I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't plant this as a landscape plant, like a ground cover or anything like that, unless you, you really liked it, you really liked harvesting these things, or you really liked, the look of the ground cover, because it certainly isn't going away anytime soon. But this is one that we've had great success with. It's got a lot of versatility for those tubers, and definitely one of our favorites. The next thing, everyone knows sea grapes. I haven't heard a lot of people actually doing anything with the grapes that they produce. They're very sweet when you get them when they're ripe. And they definitely, if you can find, older specimens, produce enough that you can just go out there for half an hour, pick a whole bunch of fruit off, and have jars and jars that you can do jellies with. You can bake cakes with it, or just sit on the couch and snack, because they are absolutely fantastic. And some people, especially, in our area around the coast, are planting sea grapes on their properties. So it's definitely something that if if you've got this plant to use, because, once you allow these plants to get so big, they produce an incredible amount of fruit. And it's definitely something that's got a lot of allure too, just because of that fact. And cocoa plums. We've had a little bit. This is one that has definitely taken some time for us to come around to how we use it, and like recommending it to people. This is another one of our coastal plants. Pretty popular. The horizontal variety is for its kind of low growing form, as kind of a lining hedge or what have you. So the two primarily ones that we use are the horizontal variety that produces kind of like whitish, off-white or like peach colored fruit. And then there's the red tip cocoa plum. That's more of your upright grower, can reach that height much quicker, and produces kind of like a blackish fruit on it. Both of them, when they're mature, when they're ripe, do have like a very noticeable sweetness to it. We found that the red tip cocoa plums generally have a little bit more of like a fruit flavor to them, kind of like a mild apple. So we definitely recommend using that specific variety. But either one of them, these are great out of hand. If I'm ever walking to the back of the nursery, you've got a few shrubs planted, I'll pick one off and eat them because they taste great. And actually the seeds inside of them can be roasted and eaten as kind of like a roasted nut. And it's got a wonderful flavor. And you'll see that the one time that we got enough cocoa plums to make one of our recipes that we had been waiting on, it was kind of a waste not, want not. So we used every single part of the cocoa plum to make food with, and it turned out really, really, really well. Um, and the last one that we're still trying to experiment with, and it's kind of tough because these are gigantic trees, is the shortleaf fig, Ficus citrifolia. This is one that, you know, it's a ficus. It's pretty aggressive. It'll grow like, 40 feet tall, probably taller than that, actually. But it produces little tiny fig fruits, and each one of those is, again, probably about the size of your pinky. But I took that picture that you see on my screen, yesterday. And it's fruiting like crazy. And these are plants that we've just got in pots. So once we did have enough of these to cook down into sort of like a jam, just topped a little cracker with some goat cheese and this in the fig jam, it was absolutely phenomenal. And that's the thing with a lot of these plants, is that they produce small fruits, or their harvest is small, but they just have such incredible flavors that, in my opinion, really rival or beat down in some cases some of the cultivated types of fruits, just because it's that kind of like wild, untapped flavor. Hasn't been bred for certain qualities. It's just like that's the one plant that nature intended, and that's how it tastes, and it's most of the time pretty darn good. And I think the last plant that I'm going to go through are, we've got a few different native blueberries. This is the one that we like promoting because it's got a beautiful quality to the plant itself. It's very small. The scrub blueberry, it's a very small plant, only grows to about 3 feet. Loves sun. It's got this beautiful like silvery green foliage, and as the new growth emerges, it's this light purple color, and it's absolutely beautiful. Great plant for the landscape. But once it flowers in spring, fruits in the summer, it's got these little tiny blueberries, and it's almost like you're mixing a blueberry flavor with like a hint of rose or rose water. It's got this floral note that's just absolutely unparalleled. And the problem is that because these plants don't grow so big, you would need a few of them, and go out there and fight the birds for the berries. Save enough in your freezer to be able to cook down and make a jam. But if anyone ever does this, they can email me back after they've done it and tell me how amazing it was, because this is, I think, the single most delicious native plant thing that we have ever made. It's absolutely incredible, and I can't overstate that enough. So yeah, and we've definitely got pretty easy access to all these plants, but for the most part, all these plants are pretty easy to grow in a landscape setting. Some of these are pretty adaptable to container gardening as well, especially some of the smaller baseous plants. The scrub blueberry, I potted one of those up a few years ago in a pot, kept it on my patio until I realized that I had too much shade and it wasn't happy there. So, but a lot of these plants are very easy to keep in containers like you would normal vegetables or herbs or anything like that. So it's kind of a fun way to experiment with new flavors and try new things. So I do have a few more that I have to go over, because there is some misconception about, are they native? Are they not native? Everglades tomatoes, despite the name, are not native. They are naturalized, so you could find them out in the wild if you went and looked in certain places. But they make absolutely tasty fruits. They are just packed with tomato flavor. They've got a really, really hard tang that hits you, and they're fantastic. I haven't had enough to make like a tomato sauce out of them, which I really wanted to do. Just seemed like as we were collecting these, it's one of those plants that we kind of lost track of production wise. So we never really had enough, but once you've got these plants in your yard, it's definitely very easy because they reseed easily. And they're just incredibly tasty. Not native, but great for your garden. And the other one is Seminole pumpkin. Again, not native, naturalized in I think a lot fewer counties, but even still a few counties. But they make great squashes. This is something that we used in a few of our demonstrations for our cooking programs, because they're a great squash. They've got great flavor, and they've got pretty big, they're pretty big fruits. So you get a good amount of yield out of these things too. So now that I've rambled on about all the plants, I'm going to go through the fun stuff and show you all the ideas, all the recipes that we've kind of collected and gone through. So the first year, that first spring Eco Fest, we did a few different things. We made yopon teas, which are absolutely delicious. You know, you just grab a few leaves from your yopon, toast them, or don't. You know, you can make a green tea out of them as well, and then steep them. But one of the other accompaniments I had for that was a cream cheese and herb spread. So that was just a little tiny chunk of homemade bread, of course. Everyone's got time for that now. But homemade bread, and it was just a simple cream cheese that was whipped up with the wild basil, dotted horse mint, our meadow garlic, and bird pepper. Just blend it all up. And really, that one is something that everyone always asks me to make again. Give me a recipe, you know, make a bunch of it so that I can buy it in bulk, because it really is something that when you combine all of these flavors, even in something as simple as cream cheese or butter or something like that, it really just layers on the flavor and makes anything extreme and delicious. So even just a little tiny piece of bread, it was definitely a hit. So if you've got any of these plants or are interested in growing any of these plants, I would tell you to get them, start growing them, and make this once, and I think you'll definitely be hooked. So we did that. One of our good friends, Amanda Streets, decided and heard our pleas that you know, every program before this we would ask, all right, now if we have any other questions, we'll go over them, and if anyone wants to bring us 200 cocoa plums to make this cocoa plum pudding, then we will absolutely do that. And she was the crazy person that decided to bring us 200 cocoa plums, like you can see there. Those are what the red tip cocoa plums look like. So she brought them. We managed to find one legitimate recipe for cocoa plum pudding using cocoa plums. And the recipe required 200 plums. So eventually that kind of happened. And these are pictures that Hillary took as she processed these. Essentially, you could just boil the bulk amount of fruits down, you know, with a little bit of sugar. She's got a cinnamon stick in there too. You would just boil them down so that the flesh kind of melded with, you know, the flesh came off of the seed. And then you would drain that to kind of make the pulp that you see in the middle picture. And then that was mixed in with the rest of the batter for the pudding. And I should say that this is like a European style pudding, so kind of a cake, not exactly American pudding. So, you know, just mixed in the flesh with that and then baked it. And that's how the little bundt pudding cake came out. And with the rest of the water, or the syrup kind of that was drained off from the pulp, she added a whole bunch more sugar, a thickening agent, and made a syrup for it as well. And it was really, really good. The red tip cocoa plums definitely made the difference because they've got that more distinct like fruit flavor. It's not just sweetness. So it was absolutely phenomenal. And since then, we have been asking anyone else that wants to bring us another 200 cocoa plums that we will make you a pudding. So that offer is still on the table. And of course, like I said, waste not, want not. So after she processed all the flesh and all the pulp out of the fruit, she then went through the painstaking process of cracking open each and every nut off of those cocoa plums to get to what was inside, toasted them in a dry pan, and then threw in some sugar and made a brittle out of it. And again, once you get inside the nut and actually get to that edible part, it's great. It's kind of like a mild hazelnut almost, and it was fantastic, especially in the brittle. It was absolutely incredible. So, you know, if you're crazy enough to go out in your yard and harvest your cocoa plums, you can use every single piece of that, and every single piece of it is delicious. So of course we've gone through and processed our elderflowers since we've got our bearing tree on the nursery property. So this is one that you would essentially just steep the flowers in a simple syrup solution. Adding a few lemon slices really helps pull out all of the flavor with the acidity of it. So you would just let that steep for, like, I think we did about 2 to 3 days. on a countertop covered. Let it steep, drain all the stuff out, and then you've got an elderflower syrup. It's wonderfully fragrant. It's got a very nice floral quality to it. We made lemonade with it. Simple lemon juice, simple syrup and water. You could carbonate it as well if you wanted some like elderflower soda, something like that. It's a little bit of work for these because you do want to be careful of the stems, and you can see some green in there, and it's not the worst thing if you're steeping it, but when you're actually cooking it down like a beautyberry, or I'm sorry, an elderberry jam or jelly, you do kind of want to make sure that you're not getting too much of that in there, because then you can start getting some stomach aches, some grumblies, and and start cursing at Davis and Hillary because they told you it was edible. But I see Stefan's got a little a fluorescence there. A little, I'm sorry, panicle? Stefan, is that the correct term?
Yeah, it is a panicle.
Actually, no.
Maybe it might be an umble.
It is an umble.
But,
I'm sorry. It's definitely an umble.
Yeah, it's a great time to harvest them. An umble. Okay, so it is an umble. That's the arrangement of the flowers, and awesome time to harvest them, and they're just incredible. And I was just gonna say, lucky enough that I tried all those recipes that I just showed, and they were all amazing. So I can vouch for it.
Actually, yeah. I'm now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure Stefan's been along for all of these different rides that we've been on. So if anyone doubts any of the integrity of our experiments or how these things actually turned out, I've got him on the inside to vouch for me. So with the cucumbers, this is what I kind of devised to do for this, and I think this was actually one of our hors d'oeuvres that we presented last year for this chapter. So essentially, I roasted a few Seminole pumpkins. Again, I know they're not native, but they're definitely tasty, and we had them. So I had this idea of a crostini, a little bagel chip or whatever, with a base of herb spread, a roasted vegetable, and like something pickled to add that kind of briny saltiness to the rest of everything. So I roasted some Seminole pumpkin with a few of the herbs. I just tossed it with olive oil after I cut it up with some of the herbs that we've mentioned before, threw it in the oven. And we had a few jars of our native pickles that I cut in half, kind of like a caper, like just that kind of briny saltiness. And then on the base is an herbed butter. So that's again, the herbs we mentioned before, fresher, they're not cooked down, and then on top of a little like toasted bread chip. And that one was fantastic as well. Cute little hors d'oeuvre with the native plants. And that one was definitely a favorite too. That was one of my favorites because those pickles I really understate them. And maybe I'm just a little too proud of discovering it here locally. But I think definitely the appeal in the size of them is definitely something cool too. But unfortunately, my delicious crostinis were overshadowed that day by Hillary's absolutely delicious beautyberry fairy cakes with candied violas. So we did a few experiments with our native violets in trying to candy the flowers, but they are so much more delicate than your non-native violets. So I don't have the pictures in this PowerPoint, but the pictures I had of her trying to candy them, they just came out looking like squashed bugs on a windshield, and it wasn't really appealing at all. So after the fact, after that didn't really work out, she went back and candied some actual some of the non-native viola flowers, topped them up, and she actually instead of for her wet ingredients in the batter for the cake, she used elderflower, her elderflower syrup. So it didn't really shine through. For something like that, you kind of have to apply or use in kind of a raw state because it is such a delicate flavor. But just to throw it out there, she did use it. And inside of each one of the fairy cakes, they were stuffed with beautyberry jelly, and they were absolutely killer. She also used a little bit of the liquid beautyberry in the icing as well, and that kind of gave it the color there, the pinkish color. They were absolutely delicious. I know that she loathed the whole process because start to finish that took her way too much time. But the second someone asked her, Hillary, would you do it again? She's like, yeah, okay, I would. So maybe after she comes back from vacation, someone can pop her the question and see if she'll make some more fairy cakes for everyone. So yeah, just to name a few, there's definitely some other stuff that we've gone over and done. A few other natives that we've used. Springtime is a little bit different. We definitely have a lot of emerging herbaceous plants that we'll like to use. We kind of look more towards like the fresher flavors. Definitely try and cut out a lot of the sugar during that season, because we got to save it for the summer. But it's kind of all about really getting out there, figuring out what you've got in your yard or what you would like to plant in your yard, and finding those added benefits. I'll always add the disclaimer that you do need to be sure of what you're eating. Make sure what you have is identified as such, and you're not eating plants that you're not sure of. Wilcox Nursery or Davis Byrkit Enterprises is not responsible for any harm, any stomach aches, upset bellies that you may incur. But it's a really fun outlet, creative outlet for us when we like, cooking. We like doing all these different things, and being able to express kind of a mashup, a love between native plants and in the culinary world. And it's something that I haven't seen a lot of people do. So I definitely feel very proud to be able to take part in it and kind of spread awareness for not just growing plants for the wildlife, but for you too. So,
Thank you, David. That was awesome. And I just wanted to thank you and for coming on this journey that you've done, kind of bring it. There's people that have written books about if you're trapped in the forest, you can eat bark until someone rescue you or something like that. But you're kind of taking it, saying that these things are delicious in their own right and can be elevated to a really almost like fancy level, but can just be really good on their own. So I want to open it up to questions for everybody, but we have a couple of questions. So Ginger asked, and we could go really dive deep on the stopper berries and marlberry and snowberry, and all these berries have some sort of ability to them, and there's so many different things. But Ginger was specifically asking about any of the passion flower species we have, because passion fruit is so popular. The Passiflora edulis, I believe, is the one that people are used to eating. Have you tried any of our native passion fruits?
Yeah, definitely, I have. Definitely the Passiflora incarnata, our native maypop, is definitely the most edible, I think, of all the ones that I've tried. I have not eaten. I'm forgetting the species. Our corky stem passion flower. Not tried eating those little tiny berries. I usually leave those ones for the birds, but and also the white maypop, the Passiflora pallens, that South Florida species. I would stay away from the latter two. I haven't tried the corky stem, but the white passion flower kind of tastes like Dawn dish soap. It's not good, and I'm pretty sure I've eaten it when it's not ripe, when it is ripe, and it doesn't make a difference. But the maypops actually do taste very good when they are ripe. They don't have that quite that kind of goopy yellow consistency and color like the Passiflora edulis, like the commonly cultivated edible passion fruit. Um, but they do have a really nice sweet like tropical flavor. Each one of those little seeds is kind of and there's a whole bunch inside of the fruit, is kind of coated in like a sweet flesh that you can kind of just pop it all in your mouth, and eat like that. Or if you're able to gather enough of the fruits, I'm sure you could, do jellies or jams, or, look into preservation. But if you've got May pop fruits that, have not yet popped, and you're interested in trying it, they definitely taste very, very good. So that's something I would recommend.
Awesome. And someone did comment that corky stem passion fruit, which is like a tenth the size of a grape, does not taste like anything. So good for you, sorry to actually go find some corky stem passion fruit before the birds got them. And I had a couple questions about what's called ground nut, ground cherry, tomatillo, native tomatillo, physalis. It grows in coastal areas very, very well if you need a salt-tolerant plant. Have you tried any of those?
We had, yeah, we have. We've brought some of those in. I can't remember the species offhand, but we did try a few experiments with them. And the problem that we found is that they didn't have a very like distinct flavor. When they were ripe, they were kind of sweet, but there wasn't a whole lot of like tomato flavor or tomatillo flavor. It was just kind of like a kind of sweet thing. We were thinking about, kind of trying to replicate like a tomatillo salsa, with some of that, some bird pepper and some other herbs. One, we never really got production going well enough. In our few trial runs when we had ripe fruit, when we would try them, we weren't really taken with the flavor of the fruit. I know they're definitely edible and you can partake, but that's something that we kind of lost interest in after a little bit of trial and error. Might be something we pick up again. I don't know if we have to process them in a certain way to bring out a certain flavor. But it is something that we sell at the nursery off and on, and I'm pretty sure right now we've got maybe a handful left. But yeah, definitely edible, but haven't used them quite as much.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure there's so many things you guys could potentially be using. I did have someone ask, which I think is pretty interesting, about tiger nut. And I said, what is tiger nut? Davis, do you know what tiger nut is?
I'm not familiar with tiger nut.
So I had to do a quick search, and it's actually yellow nut sedge, which if you have done, maintenance, Davis, you have, but getting rid of nut sedge is very difficult and time consuming, but the actual nut of the yellow nut sedge is also called a tiger nut. So there you go. I mean, we haven't even gone down to the weeds yet, so that's something that I did not know.
Yeah, and that's something that we try to like define as like, there are also weeds and stuff like that you could go eat. You go eat Spanish needle, supposedly the yellow nut sedge and some other stuff. We try to keep it in line with like what you could also plant as a typical landscape plant. Some people are growing the Spanish needle as a legitimate landscape plant for the wildlife benefit. But for us, we tried to keep it with like stuff that we've got in pots at the nursery and then like a few other extras. But that's something interesting. That's something we might look into, is that. I wonder what kind of flavor that thing has.
I mean, I think vitamins you'll eventually get in your yard anyway. But yeah, I've had it in some salads actually. Mallory will make it in a nice salad. Yeah, the younger leaves. But we also had Suzanne ask about it, because I did mention marlberry, which I have seen people eat before. I've tasted it myself, just a few. Have you ever tried marlberry, or did you ever consider that one at all?
Yeah, I have tried marlberry, and I think it actually is a pretty distinct flavor. The one kind of roadblock that I found in like my early testing, my scientific method, is is that they are small fruits, and a good portion of it are seeds, and the seeds are pretty bitter. They've got a lot of like tannin in it or something that kind of goes through the mouth. So I was working. I was in contact with a local couple that make YouTube videos, and had worked with them on getting some natives into their yard so that they could kind of incorporate it into their videos. They make a lot of wine and ales, meads, and stuff like that. And I talked to them, and they were interested in trying out using the marl berries to make a wine. And I thought that was really cool. I did kind of lose touch with them, so I'm not sure where that is in the process, if they've tried it, if they've had success with it. But it's definitely something I think has some validity to it. I think the fruits taste really good if you can just kind of like bite into one and work your way around the seeds without crushing them and kind of getting all that bitterness across your palate. I think they're really good, and I think that's something that this year, now that we've gone through kind of what we have already, we're going to start looking for stuff like that. Some of the other berries.
That's great. Yeah. Well, we're all looking forward to trying the marlberry wine, maybe some stopper mead or something. But so Katie had a good point about people who have pet birds, which would probably translate over to birds out in the wild. But she said that the pets like the tomatillos from the store. So she was considering growing our native physalis to potentially feed to her pet bird, but that would also probably mean that it's a good food source for birds. And then Jan had mentioned that the tomatillos should be very ripe, so don't eat them. Usually anything that's green, plants will have defense mechanisms. They don't want to be eaten until they're ready to be eaten. So you should probably never eat anything that isn't ripe anyway, but Jan mentioned that. So that's a really good point. And Davis, I was curious, as you're going through all these different native plants, and everybody knows about all the problems we're having with citrus. I mean, is it crazy to think that one day you'll be the baron of a 10,000 acre cocoa plum plantation somewhere?
No, I mean, me and Hillary have already run through scenarios where, the apocalypse happens and people are throwing like bottle caps at each other as currency, and they're trying to fight for the last like morsel of canned tuna. And what we've decided is that we would, find a plot of land in secret that we would plant with all of these plants, and then basically rule all of Pinellas or the world, because we have, we were prepared. Yeah.
Well, Davis, that went down a dark road very fast. I appreciate
what?
that.
What did I say? So I blacked out for a second.
Do you think that there's actually a commercial one day, a commercial industry potentially for something that's actually big, like a really big cocoa plum, if they could breed varieties that actually have more flesh on or something like that? I mean, especially an edible nut as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's something that, I think we only tried once, processing wise, because we were we don't ever get enough fruits on potted plants in the nursery, much less the few specimens that we actually have on the property. So the one time that we were really able to buckle down and go through a recipe, I think it turned out really, really good. But yeah, I mean, I think it's something that, if more people, start to pay attention to stuff like this, that they can really start introducing, more cultivated varieties of like, all right, well, now we're growing cocoa plums for fruit production and other things like that. But even as is, if you've got, a hedgerow of cocoa plum, I think that's plenty of plants to produce enough fruit that you could make a cake, or you can make brittle, or whatever you really wanted to do.
That's awesome. And thank you, Deborah. And again, everybody's saying, thank you very much. But do you see any recipe book potentially that you and Hillary could put together, and maybe I can be the editor, the food taster for something like that?
You're just trying to get in on this, man. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely talked about doing a sort of recipe book. I mean, maybe a loose recipe book. if we've got the time to really sit down and actually produce legitimate recipes, it's the only problem really with making is that we would want to make a legitimate cookbook or recipe book if we did this, which means we would want to do trial and error, make sure that the recipes are as good as possible, test a few different quantities of this or that. As far as promoting the certain types of plants and how they can be used in a very, in a kind of general sense, like I've done tonight, I think is a good starting point, because then people can sort of start to experiment for themselves. But it is something we've talked about, I think, since that first presentation, is coming up with some kind of cookbook, or even just like a more detailed version of something like this, that we can hand out to people and say like, hey, did you know? Go try it.
Well, you would have a lot of supporters. And again, I just want to thank Davis for coming out here and doing this awesome presentation. And